Hey everybody, I just wanted to preface this week's episode of Nubs Collection. It's going to be dealing with a little bit of a heavier subject matter than my standard, rather silly episodes of Nubs Collection. Specifically, it's going to be delving into my own experience with suicidal thoughts and ideations. If you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts or considering it, please don't wait. There are resources available online. There's a toll-free number, 988, dials to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Don't wait. Try to get help. I am by no means a doctor or someone who has any experience in counseling people who are suicidal. So don't look to me as, an example of how to handle stuff like that. But if you do feel like you have an issue and need help, please seek it. Anyway, let's go ahead and get the episode started. Good morning, good afternoon, and or good evening. You are watching Nubs Collection, a YouTube series dedicated to the cataloging and review of every game in my physical media collection. As always, I am your host, Victory Nub, and today we are looking at Ice Hockey, developed and published by Nintendo and Nintendo's Research and Development Team 4, and released in the United States in March of 1988. So, as I mentioned in a previous episode of Nubs Collection, specifically the one for Star Tropics, this is one of the games that my mother had picked up at a garage sale around the time I was in college, I would believe is when it happened. And I didn't really play it a whole lot when I initially got it. I remember playing it very briefly when I was a much younger kid, but I never actually owned it. I think it may have been one that a relative or a friend had a copy of, and I played it that way. But as we'll find out while the game is actually playing, I am terrible at this game, really bad at this game. And it's definitely going to affect my score at the end of the video. We will do a traditional score, but I had a little bit of a topic I wanted to discuss during this episode, specifically about my own personal relationship with the sport of hockey, how I came into being a fan of it, and also how it has affected my own personal life. Which sounds very maudlin, but I promise there is a happy ending to the story that I'll be telling today. Anyway, let's do the story setup for the game, as silly as it is. There's a story for Ice Hockey. The story section is simply called Object of the Game / Game Description. Ice hockey is hard-hitting, fast-action competition. Each team tries to put the puck into its opponent's goal. The game consists of 3 periods, and the team with the most points at the end of the game wins. When the score is tied at the end of the 3 periods, the game is decided with penalty shots. If the score is still tied following the penalty shots, the game goes into overtime without goalkeepers. Well, they've definitely changed the sport since then. At the start of the game, and at the start of each period, one player from each team goes to the center of the rink for a face-off. They put that in quotes, I don't know why. From there on out, it's non-stop mayhem on the ice, a battle to the end. Will you be the champion? And that's it. That's all they had. There's really not a whole lot of story necessary for a sports game, but they do offer a little bit of it, just a little blurb there. So anyway, I guess I should start with talking about when I first became a fan of the sport, because it wasn't one that I watched when I was growing up as a kid. I only started watching hockey in general, and the local team, I happen to be a fan of the Washington Capitals, around 2007-ish. Around that time, basically the talk in town was all about Alexander Ovechkin, and it still is, really. He is fast approaching the record, well, not the record, but the second highest goals of all time in the NHL. He's within about 20 goals of tying that record as of today's date, and I'm recording this on September 15th of 2022. So the season will start in about 2 or 3 weeks here. But yeah, if he scores 21 goals, he'll be the second all-time goal scorer in the NHL. Anyway, we're going to start the video here by showing a pair of videos that I recorded. The first one that we're going to see is a video that I recorded on my phone outside of the Verizon Center on June, I want to say it was 6th or 7th of 2018. And the second video that we're going to look at here is me again recording with my phone inside of Nationals Park for the baseball team, the Washington Nationals, on October 30th of 2019. So the question that you would have to ask after watching both of those videos, and in particular seeing the second one, that almost inaudible wailing sound that sounds like someone's being murdered, that was me. I was very happy the night that the Nationals won the World Series. The question that would come up is, why was my response so different? Because in the case of the night that the Capitals won the Stanley Cup, I was inaudible. There was no sound coming from me. And there was a reason for that, as we'll get into as the video progresses here. So we're going to go back all the way to when I was in school. I was a fairly smart kid in high school. I usually averaged about an A or B plus average in most of my classes, but I never really did much studying. Most of that stuff just came natural to me, and I didn't really have to put in much effort to get good grades in most of my classes. In fact, in senior year of high school, I had the highest average in the entire school in advanced accounting. As strange as that is, for whatever reason, I really grasped the subject well. However, in senior year, I did start struggling to come up with what I was going to do after high school. One of the things that they stress a lot in school is, you have to start considering what you want to do for a career once you get out of school. And I could not, for the life of me, think of anything that I had a particular interest in. And unfortunately, it's something that carried over into college. When I did finally get into a 4-year school, and this was after 3 years of community college, I switched majors about 4 times. I switched between accounting, which I found I was very bored with, art, which I wasn't terribly great at. I did a lot of pencil drawing in high school, but I wasn't great with color. It's hard to be a great artist when you can't see the color green, right? I switched majors to computer science for a while. The part that really kicked my butt there was I had to take physics. And in high school, I was mostly a life sciences guy. I took a lot of biology and geology, and I don't think I ever took a single physics class because it was an elective. You either chose between the mathematical sciences and the life sciences, and for whatever reason, I always focused on life sciences. And then finally, I switched to an English major with a writing concentration, and I was a fairly good writer. Well, I say that about myself. Maybe other people didn't think I was a great writer, but ultimately, that was the last major I took before I ended up dropping out of college. At some point, I just started skipping classes because I did not care what I was doing in any of the classes that I was taking, and for whatever reason, I didn't put it together at the time, but I was suffering from depression. After about 3 years and not much progress in figuring out what I wanted to do and failing grades in a lot of classes, I ended up dropping out of college. Around that time, I did start suffering from suicidal ideations on a regular basis. There was a bridge that I would think about driving out to and just jumping off and killing myself. It was really rough around the time that I dropped out of college, and also I'd say the first 6 months after I dropped out. I really struggled, and for whatever reason, I didn't get the help that I know I should have gotten, and I didn't. I did end up taking a job doing overnight stocking for a big box store. I'll leave the name out, but it wasn't a great job. I was barely making maybe 10 cents more per hour than I was when I was still in high school and got a managing job at a local amusement park. I ended up applying for a position with my current employer about 6 months into that overnight stocking job, and they didn't offer it to me at the time. I actually got as far as the interview process, and for whatever reason, they had someone else that they wanted to offer the job to. And it fed into what had started developing into kind of a failure complex, this belief that because I dropped out of college, because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do for a living, as a career, that I was a failure, that, I was a waste. There was no reason to keep going because I hadn't done what I was supposed to do. I ended up applying a second time to the same company, and they offered me a position. It was just a field job. All they required was high school experience, or a high school diploma, rather. But it doubled the pay that I was making with the stocking position. Over the years, I did start struggling with what I believe is referred to as imposter syndrome, which, if you don't know what the term means, basically it's this belief that you suffer that, you're not supposed to be doing what you're doing for, a living or, work, their school, whatever it is, that eventually someone is going to figure out that you're a fraud, that you're not really supposed to be doing what you're doing, and then you'll be busted and fired or, fail whatever class you're doing. And I did struggle with that a lot. And I would say even today, sometimes I struggle with the notion that somehow I'm not supposed to be where I am in my career. And the reality is it didn't match how I was doing within my employment, because I get yearly evaluations at my current employer, and they're always good. They have a grading system of, originally it was 1 to 5, and then they actually added like actual levels like fully successful, commendable, outstanding, needs improvement, and then there's like a performance improvement plan if you're really struggling in your job. And I've never dropped below fully successful for anything. Most of the time it's commendable, and occasionally outstanding with a lot of the elements of my job. After about 8 years working with that company, I applied for a new job within the department. It was an office job. I wouldn't be out in the field anymore. And I actually was offered the position. At the time, I was convinced they wouldn't hire me. I thought, there's no way I have enough education, or I haven't been with the company long enough, or a dozen things. Again, this is part of the imposter syndrome aspect of it, where I'm convinced that I'm not qualified to do what I'm doing. And that wasn't the case, because they offered me the job. And I know at least 2 or 3 other of my coworkers applied, and I beat them out for the position. I ended up bringing a lot of new skills and just job knowledge into the position that hadn't been available before, because this was a fairly new position that they had just created in the last few years before I had applied. And the previous 2 people, neither one came from the position that I had prior to getting hired. One of them was just an office clerk when he came into it. And then another one came in from a different part of our department, but didn't have the same necessary skills that I had when I came into the job. Around 2018, I say 2018, it might have been a little bit later than that, but I think it was 2018. I sat down with my supervisors for my yearly evaluation, and they offered me a promotion apropos of nothing. All it was because of the merit of my performance over the previous 5 years. When they offered it to me, I didn't know how to respond. I'm sure most people would be absolutely thrilled to find out that their employer was just offering them what ended up being a 5% raise on their job. And I just kind of was, I won't say nonplussed, but I just had no response. And it wasn't because I wasn't happy, it's just I didn't know how to respond to what happened to me. So the question is, why was that happening? Well, let's go back in time a little bit again. Switch over to what hockey has to do with all this. Around 2005, 2006, when this was about the time I started with my current employer, there was a local rock station, DC 101. I live in Northern Virginia. And the morning program, Elliot in the Morning, started talking basically every single day about this Alexander Ovechkin guy. Everything he ever wanted to talk about was how this was the greatest hockey player of all time. He was going to set all kinds of insane records, and unbelievable. If you're not watching, you need to watch this guy right now. And I had turned on my first hockey game as a result of that radio program in at least a decade, and I became hooked. I mean, I'd seen some games. Usually when you saw games on national broadcasts, it was usually like Fox, and I think they had that weird graphic where any player did a slap shot, they would have like a trailing line behind the puck, which did nothing to make the puck more visible. It was just a weird gimmick that they got rid of fairly quickly. But yeah, from all the talk that they had about the sport, and in particular This Ovechkin guy, I decided I'll go ahead and watch and see what it's all about, and I loved it. I became hooked. The Capitals at that time were electric. They were an offensive juggernaut that won by outscoring other teams. They had putrid defense, at least early on in Ovechkin's career. Basically, they just relied on being more offensively potent than the other team to win most of their games at that time. And to be honest, they were considered legitimate Stanley Cup contenders, basically from the time that Ovechkin was first drafted and started appearing on the ice for the team. And I think it was very shortly after he was drafted, and maybe that same year. Usually there's players that get seasoned down in the minors for a year or two if they are a little raw. He came up almost immediately, which not a surprise because Russian players, they don't necessarily come right at the crack of their teenage years. A lot of American and Canadian players, I don't think they actually get here until 18 or 19. And in the case of Russia, a lot of their players are required to serve a term in the military. I think that's the case. It's prerequisite for males in Russia is they have to serve in the military for a certain length of time, even if they're part of a professional sport. Anyway, over the years, the team, despite having one of the best offenses in the league, became known primarily for failing to advance in the playoffs. Typically, the spot that they got stuck was the second round of the playoffs. They beat whoever they were facing the first round pretty easily, and then the second round, they collapsed. It was the Canadiens one year, and then the Rangers another year, and then the Bruins another year, and the Penguins. And the Penguins were the Capitals' arch nemesis for so many years that just could not beat them. And the team kind of became known for having all the talent in the world, but showing nothing, no results as a result of all that talent. Fast forward to 2018, they started the year so poorly that the rumor that was going around was that the coach at that time, Barry Trotz, was going to get fired. They ended up, and this was only a month or a month and a half into the season that this rumor was starting to fly, but fast forward to the end of the year, they end up winning the division and making the playoffs for the 10th time in 11 years, which, wow, to have that kind of success on a regular basis for any team in any sport is remarkable, even if you barely ever make it past the first or second round. That particular year, they did finally get out of the second round. They actually defeated the Penguins finally, and then made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, obviously, I showed a clip at the beginning of the video of the night that they ended up winning the Stanley Cup. They weren't actually at the Verizon Center that particular game. They were in Las Vegas because the Golden Knights had made it to the finals in their inaugural season, which was impressive on its own, but the Capitals winning was that little bit more impressive, not only because this was the first time the team had ever won a cup in about 45, 46 seasons of existence, but also this was the first championship won by any team of the four major sports in DC in over 26 years. And by four major sports, I mean football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. Soccer, technically, the DC United had won a championship a couple of times, but they're not considered one of the four majors. Maybe one time in the future, soccer will be held with the same esteem in the U.S. as the other sports, but right now it isn't. That day, my response was very flat as well, a lot like when I got offered a promotion with my job. I was happy, but it just I wasn't expressing it emotionally. When I and one of the channel friends of the channel, Shinobi Dave, can attest to. I think I kept saying during the night I didn't know how to respond. Like I couldn't explain what I was feeling at that time. But I ended up getting back to my car eventually. We didn't stick around much longer after the game ended because I had to work the next day. But when I got back to the car, I just started crying, sobbing. I mean, it was uncontrollable. And without understanding what was happening, I had started equating my own life experiences as an adult with the team. They had all the talent in the world and never produced any positive results. And personally, I felt the same way. I had the talent, but it didn't amount to anything. And that's not the reality. I can see clearly enough now that that's not the truth. I would not have been offered a promotion out of the blue, no applying for a job, no putting in a request with supervisors. They would not have done that if I had not demonstrated through my efforts with my employer that I was worth the money. And it took a long time for me to come to realize it. That night, that's when I kind of put it together. I took two very valuable lessons about life away that night. Number one, people fail. Everyone fails at some point in their life. You're not going to be perfect or great at everything that you ever do, and that's all right. It's also, and this is the other lesson I learned, it's okay to be happy, even if you do fail. I'm not saying be happy that you failed, but I had become so convinced in my head that I was a failure because I was a college dropout, that I could not figure out what I wanted to do for a living. And if I haven't mentioned it before, I'm good at what I do for a living, but that doesn't mean I love my job. I just do it because I need to eat. I need to be able to pay my bills. But failing isn't the end of the world, and frankly, you can't wrap your entire life around one failure, no matter how big it is, and assume that nothing can ever be okay again. You can't be happy. Remember, whatever positive thing happened today, you're still a failure because of this. That's terrible, a terrible thing to do to yourself or anyone else. And it's just, I wish I had gotten that message earlier in life, because maybe I wouldn't have had the experience that I did in college. But ultimately, for whatever reason, seeing the Capitals win the Stanley Cup and having this, for lack of a better term, emotional breakthrough that night taught me it's okay to be happy. And then fast forward to the very next season for the Washington Nationals, and they ended up winning the World Series, and you could tell, obviously, from that otherworldly wailing sound that I was making that night, that I was in a very different and frankly a better place personally. If I'm being perfectly honest, this channel I don't think on YouTube would exist if I didn't experience this catharsis or cathartic moment that night and have my life perspective change. Now, did I make mistakes and did it hurt people? Absolutely. And I am sorry that that happened. But I can't spend the rest of my life beating myself up for that. No one should. That's just not a good way to live your life. And I'm happy that, I experienced it, even if it is the way that it happened, and as silly as that is to connect dots between my own personal feelings of failure and a sports team that I have nothing to do with. I just happen to like watching them. But anyway, I thought this was a good story to share, in particular because of how it relates to hockey. As far as the game that we're looking at, we're going to pivot here because I haven't really talked anything about the game here, but this game sucks. I don't know if it's become apparent just watching the video, if you're watching this and not really listening to me much. I was the Canadians in the second game, as you're watching here, and in the first game it was the Americans, and I got my butt kicked both times. This game, and I guess we can go ahead and start wrapping things up, because I don't even think it's really that necessary to see the whole game for the second one play out. We'll do the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, I guess, is it emulates the sport of hockey. So there's that. The bad, oh, where do I begin? The controls are imprecise. I can't tell you how many times while I was playing this quietly to myself, and the reason why you don't hear the audio I recorded of me talking while I was playing this is it was bad. This was all of what I'm doing right now is in post-production, the speaking in the game I played beforehand. I was cursing a lot because the controls are terribly imprecise. I would try to pass to a player, and the player would actively pivot out of position from where I was passing the puck. I would try to get people down ice to try to block defensively, and they just spin in circles and go off and do their own thing. They tied moving your players and your goalie to the same input. So if you had a bunch of guys that were above wherever the puck was and you're trying to get them into position, you would move your goalie down at the same time, and you wouldn't be able to stop a shot no matter what, because the goal mouth is way too wide in this game. For whatever reason, fighting doesn't work out the way you think it would. Heavy players lose to the small ones all the time for some reason. Shots, for whatever reason, when you try to take them, if another player just brushes against you, you lose the puck. Passing never seemed to go in the right direction. The goalie, for whatever reason, wouldn't scoop up pucks. He would bounce them off of him all the time unless it was a really light tap. Then he would just kind of grab it and take possession. Terrible game. The ugly, I don't know if there's anything I need to nitpick. The uniforms are a weird color for some of the players. Like, why is the Canadian team wearing green? I don't get that. This was not a great game, and I remember liking it more when I was younger, and maybe the experience is more enjoyable if you're playing against another human player, but this is a bad game. We'll do our score in Randars, but it's not getting a great score. This is probably going to be one of the all-time lows. And believe me, I don't understand why people love this game so much when I would read reviews about it after playing it today. This is getting 1 Randar. That's it. This is an abysmal game. I cannot believe that I wanted this. This was one of those things where I think when my mother went to this garage sale, she asked me, there were a couple of games there, and she asked me which ones I wanted, and she said ice hockey. I said, oh yeah, I remember that game. Let me go ahead and pick that up, and I'll pay you later. This is a bad game. Terrible game. Not a whole lot redemptive qualities to it. It took forever just to figure out how to do the face-off correctly and actually get the puck on my side. And, I imagine there are people who have fond memories of this game, but they probably also understood how to play it, and I didn't, obviously. 1 Randar. Bad game. Can't recommend it. There are better hockey games that exist, especially in not even just on Nintendo, but I think Sega Genesis had the one that everyone loved, NHL 93, 94. I remember playing it briefly and having a much more enjoyable time with that than we had today here, so... terrible game. Can't recommend it. Bad game. Bad game. But hopefully you enjoyed just listening to a story today. I know most of my episodes of Nub's Collection are me being snarky about the game I'm playing, or telling weird jokes, or making pop culture references about movies or music or whatever. And these episodes where I just kind of have a story I want to relate, there's not going to be a ton of them like this, but from time to time, there's going to be something I want to bring up and talk about, and I hope you guys got something positive out of this. And like I said, it ends on a positive note for me, and the way that I went about dealing with my own depression and suicidal thoughts is certainly not an example of how a person should handle that kind of thing if they are dealing with it, which is why I provided the number at the beginning of the video, and I'll mention it again, 988. It's the 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline. If you are suffering, please call them. Get help. If you don't do it that way, try to speak to a therapist. If you're in high school, speak to your counselor, principal, teacher, whatever it is. If it's not your family, if it's not your friends, there are professionals who can help you with this stuff. And I hope I gave everyone a more positive experience from what I've lived through in my life with this episode. But we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. If you're really worried about what the final score is for the game here between Canada and Sweden, Sweden wins again. The computer is really good in this game. There is no controls for the difficulty setting. It's all one difficulty, and it's way too good. But that's going to do it for this episode of Nubs Collection. As always, I do appreciate each of you watching, and I will see you next time.